Okay, here we go. Yeah, so this is our workshop with mentoring autistic minds and thinking about what happens when autistic teens become adults, in terms of social drivers of health and how to bring together kind of like research with different parts of the community. And my name is Teresa Girolamo, and as you will very shortly meet, I'm here with Alicia Escobedo and Brianna Anham. And then I know this is mostly virtual, but the name of the game is do whatever you need to do to be comfortable. And this is not really an educational workshop per se. It's really just to share information and like learn from one another. And we'll do some brief introductions and talk about kind of what we work on here at SDSU, and then hopefully talk about how we got involved with like mentoring autistic minds. And then there's time for like just kind of like mingling and discussion. So obviously we are at San Diego State University, and we are all from a place called like the Brain, Environment, and Language Lab, which is a fancy name for saying we are in a group that wants to learn more about how people, mostly autistic people, use language and communicate. And then our goal is to figure out how to support autistic people, families, and their communities. And these are some of the lab members. Not all of them are here today. I will introduce myself last, but for the purpose of like this recording, Alicia and then Brianna, do you want to come up here and introduce yourselves however you see fit? Mostly so we can hear the volume. Okay.
Hi, my name is Alicia Escobedo. I am a current PhD student here at San Diego State, and I am also a speech language pathologist in training. So happy to be here.
My name is Brianna Ankel. I am now a fourth year undergrad student and for speech language and hearing sciences. That's pretty much it.
Those were very short introductions. I have more to say later on, but we can all get to know one another. Yeah, so my name is Teresa Girolamo, and I'm an assistant professor here at San Diego State University. And I'm probably interested the most in thinking about what happens in the transition to adulthood. So again, thinking about when teenagers become adults, and especially what happens like when they age out of maybe public education, because all of the education and like child-based services kind of change. So in my case, I've been working with families for maybe like the past 7 years or so. And I used to be a special education teacher. And when I was doing research with some of these families and asking them to complete a lot of measures that people in autism research like to use, like adaptive behavior, which is like functional communication skills or functional daily living skills, I would talk to the families to give them these measures. And then I got the sense of, I don't think people are using these measures in the right way. So for example, post George Floyd, I was talking to a parent and she was explaining why a response was never for an item where like you would want a young adult to show more independence. And in this case, it wasn't that he didn't know how to do that, whatever the item was, which was going out with his friends on his own without telling her. But was really thinking about, okay, but he's autistic. And in our neighborhood, we know that people don't really know about autism. And also like, have you seen the news? So like the answer is going to be no. So between that, and then I guess talking to other families, caregivers, autistic individuals themselves about what was happening as they aged out of high school. And then we're finding that the supports they wanted that aligned with their own sense of self and with their goals were often just like not available. Because there's maybe like a little bit of a bimodal gap, if you will. So like at one end, There's supports assuming that like everyone who is autistic needs to go to like a day hab program, and it's okay to give them maybe like quote unquote like babyish, supports or services, and that's offensive. And then at the other end, I guess maybe if you follow the news or any of like the neurodiversity movement, there can be, I think, an opposite stereotype where the assumption is if you're maybe autistic, then you are like some type of whatever technological genius. So kind of across the spectrum is where we are thinking about how to help improve environments to support individuals. And this is from an interview and talking with someone about his goals, where he really just wanted to live independently. I know that's not everyone's goal, but in this case, he really wanted to live on his own in a major metropolitan area, and was going through a program to build those skills and proficiency. And for the last sentence that he said, I want to note, in this case, it's someone who also had a language disorder. And what he said was, that's the mentor training need to do. And like, I understood exactly what he was saying. He was just explaining like, I have this laminated plan. That's what the mentor trained me to do. But obviously, if you are maybe a community member, whether maybe a faculty member here at San Diego State, or just someone out in public, and you don't maybe know about language and autism or language disorders, you might hear a sentence like that and have a little bit of bias or like not understand and be less willing to maybe interact with them. So what we've kind of focused on so far, based on working with families and different community partners, is that having supports that people want for themselves is important for autistic teens and adults. And the second piece is we can trust folks to tell us what they need to meet their goals. Like, we don't have to make it up for them. It is enough to just kind of listen and then figure out how to put that into, let's say, like whatever type of services they're telling us that they want to meet their needs. And so this led us down the path of thinking about social drivers of health, or just aspects of where people live, work, play, spend their time, hang out with their friends that kind of affect outcomes. And on the right here, you can see like from Healthy People 2030, they talk about social determinants of health, which sounds kind of fatalistic. So I prefer the term social drivers of health. And it spans all these different domains from like economic stability, services for health and education, thinking about like physical aspects of where people live in terms of neighborhoods, and then social and community context, or what it feels like to be in maybe a given space or community. So from some of the examples, if you think about maybe social and community context, what we learned is that oftentimes autistic individuals themselves and then family members felt that others in the community may not know about autism, and that could negatively impact their ability to go out and like live their fullest lives. And then after high school, trying to figure out services was a pain in the, I won't say the last word, but it was a major pain point. And it's just kind of an undue burden, because all their things being equal, like no one should have to figure out a lot of bureaucratic red tape in order to access things that allow them to be self-determined and to have a nice life. So thinking about social drivers of health and discussions with families, we ended up thinking about sense of community. So the idea that you belong to a community and can have your needs met. We also talked about unmet service needs, because hands down, this was like the number one thing that families talk to us about. And then barriers to having service needs met. Because obviously people can differ in the services that they need, and I cannot tell them what those needs are, only they know. And similarly, in thinking about barriers to having their service needs met, again, that's something where people can tell us better than like we can kind of determine for them. And the same can be said for sense of community. And for sense of community, that's kind of like, I know it sounds like a hippie term, but it's also like a stand-in for like social capital. So feeling like how much maybe platform or privilege you have like based on where you live. So at first we started off thinking about, okay, so how do these social drivers of health impact outcomes? And in this case, we worked with 73 different like racially and or ethnically diverse teens and adults who use mostly spoken language to communicate. And about half of them would qualify as having like a language disorder. Um, and then about 2/3 were like male for both like sex at birth and gender. And about 1/3 were female for both sex at birth and gender. And they varied a bit in terms of whether or not they were in educational programming, what type of programming, and more. And so the take-home point is, well, one, if we're thinking about social drivers of health, sense of community was predicting the extent of social communication impairment. And this is after considering the number of unmet service needs that people had or unmet barriers. So on the x-axis there, you can see there is a scale of 1 to 5. Higher scores are better. And then as sense of community goes up, the extent of to which maybe an individual has challenges with social communication or social interaction goes down. And so in this case, higher scores on the y-axis mean you have greater impairment and lower scores mean you have lesser impairment. So in this case, we are thinking about social communication and impairment from kind of an interaction lens, right? Because autistic people can vary widely. And it's not the case that only what they bring into different environments or interactions matters. It's also maybe how responsive communities are to their individual differences and access needs. And then the second piece is in thinking about autistic individuals who don't have language impairment and have typical language skills in terms of grammar, and then those who do have language impairment. Here you can see that when you look at language scores on the x-axis, and then functional communication scores on the y-axis, what happens here is it is language that is kind of predicting functional communication outcomes. And what does this mean in terms of thinking about community? Oftentimes people will use language measures. I was trained this way myself in research to use it to help get people services, and that's okay up to a point. So oftentimes people will use like some of these clinical language measures and say, okay, if your language is this, therefore your ability to use language in everyday environments or functional communication is this. So if you have bad functional communication, therefore we need to train you to have better language. And obviously that doesn't really take into account what a person might want for themselves, right? And how they're going to use language across different environments. So from this graph, what we are thinking about more is it the case that when we think about clinical language measures, which are built to assess language from maybe just one perspective and one set of norms for like what language competence is, could it be the case that functional communication is measuring to an extent how environments and people in different environments may or may not have the skills to support someone who is autistic and varies in their language profile. And that isn't something that we looked at in this study, but based on what families have shared with us, it sounds like they're actually making decisions based on what they know is happening in their communities or maybe in their environments in terms of thinking about like where their kid may or may not go, especially in major urban areas like the Northeast. So where we are at right now is thinking about, okay, well, we know that we need to have supportive environments. We don't know what people in communities know about either autism or how to communicate with autistic people. And then the next step where kind of, I think mentoring autistic minds comes in, as well as working with like Brianna and Alicia, is thinking about, well, how do we provide supports to autistic people and communities? Not from the lens of, okay, we're only going to try and change autistic people, but for example, and maybe Lisa can share, when we talk to different people from like kind of the SDSU campus community, we have found that there is a really big need for information. And so some of the providing supports is going to involve like people in the community and not, necessarily autistic people themselves in terms of who we're trying to change. And so for bridging community and research, basically we've just gone around to like pretty much every single office on campus to figure out what they know about what's happening. We've talked to people from Best Buddies in San Diego, Mentoring Autistic Minds, CA Help, which is associated with like the state government of California and does a lot of service delivery in charter areas, as well as the Children's Hospital of Orange County, to try and figure out how to bring different perspectives together to provide supports and get people resources that they tell us they want. In order to support autistic people and to have better quality environments. And maybe Alicia and Brianna, you can talk for a bit about like some of what you have just kind of observed, because, Jesus take the wheel. I say this in a non-religious sense. I'm not religious at all, but like Jesus take the wheel. I feel like talking to faculty and staff at San Diego State was an eye-opening experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Oh, yeah, sorry. Okay. Yeah, so just some reflections that we've, I guess, had as a group, but also in my own individual experiences. It's been really eye-opening to talk to the larger community, not just here at SDSU, but I guess in the larger San Diego area in terms of like, well, what are areas that we can support? So for myself, as I think about my future as a speech language pathologist, but also someone who's really interested in student mentoring, it's been very, very helpful. And like I said, eye-opening in terms of thinking about, well, how can we best support these individuals? How can we best support the community and then the larger community? So it has been really, really great to hear and have these kinds of conversations. Of course, all in the interest of making sure that we are making a positive impact on the lives of individuals. So, yeah.
Can you share a little bit about University Police Department?
Oh, sure.
Pretty much every single training.
Yeah, so we talked with the university police department. We were there telling them a little bit about what we do and kind of what we're interested in. And they gave us really helpful insights in terms of how we can help in terms of, like I said, making a positive impact in the community. So they gave us examples of like, okay, are there things that we can do like in the lab and here in SLHS that can, I guess, talk a little bit about, well, how do we navigate when students, for example, need a little bit of support because it's like their first time in college? Or how can we help support navigate these kinds of conversations with other people in the community? So like teachers, professors and other students who have a, daily interaction with other people in this community. So we got lots of great ideas. I'm not sure if that's what you wanted me to say. Okay.
No, it was
Yeah.
just, it was mostly just that like faculty and staff were interested, but they had no clue. So I think you had to hop off for this, but long story short, some of the faculty very clearly might have a neurodivergent or autistic student in the classroom.
Yes.
And just did not know how to do accommodations because it's not part of their training.
Yeah.
So our hope is to try and figure out how to bring everyone up to speed together.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which is really important, especially at a university setting. So yeah, go ahead.
Alicia did a really good job at saying those key points. But I have had, well, my brother has autism and he's minimally speaking. He's older. So I've always been used to being around people who have neurodiversity or stuff like that. And a couple months ago, um, there was this student who I was just sitting at Scripps Cottage, and he came up to me, and I was eating a popsicle, and we started having a conversation and everything. And then he's like, out of nowhere, he's like, "Can I see your tongue?" And I was like, I don't think so. My mouth kind of smells." But but it was just, I'm not assuming that he had a neurodiversity, but what I have interacted with and stuff like that, I just kind of set my boundaries because I'm not very much of a person who likes hugging either or stuff like that. But I think it's just important to understand that I'm kind of going everywhere. This is my ADHD brain. But there's different ways to communicate and like setting boundaries. So I know sometimes I could say I could be a lot too. But I wonder what if another student done if they weren't exposed to like autism or neurodiversity before. So I'm like, I'm grateful he asked me instead of someone else, because somebody could have been taken aback. But I feel like I got off topic now. Anyways, but I'm just excited that I get to be a part of this lab who kind of takes part in like hearing voices of like neurodiverse individuals. So yeah, that was a lot. I don't know if I got my point across. You're fine. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so just for everyone, I know it's recorded on Zoom. So I think one of the things that we learned, and I did show all the campus offices, let me go back a slide, because it would look like one of those maps that you see on like Criminal Minds or CSI or something. So at San Diego State University, we went from talking with University Police Department to the Mobile Crisis Response Team, PCAST, to student counseling, to Center for Students' Rights and Responsibilities, did workshops for the Center for Inclusive Excellence. And gosh, I feel like we probably hit up a couple other offices, but what we learned is that there is a lot of institutional knowledge based on both where I think they see there are gaps in terms of not having resources or supports that autistic students are coming to them and saying they want. So we are trying to figure out how to develop some of those supports. So from Brianna's story, I think what you left, can I add one small detail? So when that young man asked to see your tongue, it's because he really liked teeth, right? And so if you think about different interests or things that people might have, you were great. And you were just like, yeah, you can't see my tongue, but like, we're cool, like we're friends or friendly or whatever. But elsewhere on campus, I think some of the San Diego State students at the undergraduate level have not necessarily had this attitude. So I think there's been a number of them who have like gone and like called campus units about students who are maybe like autistic or neurodivergent. And that is like the climate we would like to change, where it's not thinking about just like, what do autistic students need to know or do? Because I don't know, I feel like you telling him like, yeah, you can't see my tongue is like fine and you can leave it there. But we do need to change the climate where campus units and peers and faculty and staff like don't have the knowledge of how to just be like decent human beings. And part of that probably will include training on like communication and autism. And this is a very small group today. So we plan to do a group activity, which we won't do. I'll show it just for the sake of having the recording. And maybe this is something, David, where people might answer asynchronously. But we would be interested in learning just like, what is it that people want to change and what do people want others to know about themselves or their families? And then what can we do to improve the environment?
and thinking about helping people just kind of meet their goals, whatever they may be. Yeah, and so that's the end, and I'll stop the recording and the sharing, and we can just chat for a few minutes.